Hey, welcome back everybody. Today we're talking about the secret update they're cooking here for Rust Console Edition for the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series. So here's the deal. We're talking about trains. We saw a lot of movement here already with trains, but we're starting to see even more movement. And I wanted to cover this because I don't think this is coming anytime this year or anytime soon. Well, I guess soon, maybe next year, but we're starting to see more movement in this department yet again. So I'm going to make the analogy or the comparison to our modular vehicles. Now, we now have those on new gen, but we saw movement on this for quite some time. And I think it took longer for them to bring it up because initially it was being keyed in to be for old gen. But then when they had the new gen directive, they kind of, had to push everything into that. But we definitely saw a movement with cars. Many indications that they were working on cars, and we're starting to see that here with trains. So I'll try to make that analogy here. Okay, so what are we talking about? So trains came in two different flavors, or at least in two different, almost three phases here on PC. Now, it's important to kind of know where this came from, how these different phases work, and why this guy is the most important thing for our little clue that we found. But it came in two phases. Let me try to drop under here. I really don't like floating around the void. It makes me, I don't know, I don't like it. It makes me nervous. Makes me feel like we're floating in the abyss. Here we go. So subway systems came first. There are different ways that interlink the underside of the map. And there are now train terminals that go from the above ground to underground to connect these subway tunnels. Essentially everything, every monument is connected with the system. That came along with this are train tracks, but also the work cart, which is the core of everything here. Here's the work cart. Now, the work cart comes in flavors. There's a work cart prefab, but then there's a work cart entity. Entities are, for lack of a better term, rigged up to be functional, from lights to a fuel storage area to storage itself, to little interlocking clamps here that you can use to hit other cars. And this actually moves forwards and backwards. You can actually see, let me go ahead and pop in here. You can see the driver's section here, and you can actually go forwards, backwards, and even turn on the light. So it has functionality, so it's an entity that's functional. But if you were to carve these things out, you can actually just get the object itself, a prefab, and that's often used across Rust and many other games, but Rust is no exception. So you'll see things that decorate other areas of the prefabs, but the entities are turned off, so it's not functional. You kind of saw things like this with the cars. You saw different car parts that weren't like you couldn't pick them up, but the car parts, were the models they actually use when you pick things up and drop them on the ground, like this. Let me see if I can drop one here. So here's why this is all pertinent. So actually, you can actually see this in the fishing village. There's baskets just like this, and they show these car parts, and you can actually see them. But you see how these are actual things we can interact with, but then there's also things that actually decorate the world itself. That's important because we're starting to see things like that already. And I actually, this is like recently, this is on the PTB right now as of recording this. I noticed this when I was kind of moving around, and I was like, wait a minute. Does that mean they're working on these again? Quite possibly. Anyways, to go back to the way the trains came in, we initially had the subway system, the terminals, and the work carts. This is the core unit. Then we got surface tracks, which are quite complicated. And then we got locomotives. And then we got things like these caboose, but you can see that the work cart still exists here. It's just almost like a building structure that's put on top of it. And then we got another vehicle that has some of the prefabs from the work cart, like the wheels and stuff, but this is like a completely different frame. We have things like the caboose, where you can do blackjack and stuff. That's a whole different thing. But you can see how some of these core units are used across the world. And this is important because this work cart was the initial vehicle, right? So let me go ahead and just kind of fly over here. Hopefully I do this in an order that makes sense. This is like my 50th take, so hopefully hopefully it makes sense. So anyways, you can kind of see why this is not going to be almost immediately, because I have a feeling since we're a hybrid version of this game, we'll most likely see all of the train stuff initially, I'm guessing. But it's possible they could just give us the subway stuff. But you can see just how complex this gets. And yes, we're going into the jungle biome here. But there's different interlocking areas. You can steer things. There's different ways to interchange. They weave in and out of monuments. They get very close. And as we saw previously, I guess it's worth mentioning, there's terminal cutouts. I don't think we have one like really close out here. But basically, almost every monument has a terminal cutout that connects to the subway tunnel underground. Let me show you this. And this is pertinent too because this is one of the initial indicators that we got. We'll probably come back to this here in a second. I promise this will all make sense. So when the donut map came out, this is before New Gen was even a thing, this is a terminal outside of Outpost. This is important because we essentially saw this cut out this dirt. So you can kind of see how like there's literally a cut into the world. So you can see like the void, like that white area. Imagine that covered with dirt and these tiles like knocked away. You would see like bare dirt and you'd see grass and a little bit of gravel at the bottom. Well, we're seeing that currently in our donut maps because essentially they did what they did with the card stuff where they had it in the game, but they turned certain things off. So essentially, terminals do kind of exist. They may not be functional or connected to anything, but they're turned off. You can still see this bald spot outside of the outpost, outside of one of the main gates to the left. And there's still more changes coming to the outpost itself, but you can start to see that you're like, hey, they're messing with terminals. That's like a thing. They had to shut it off. Same thing with cars. Again, I'm going to bring this into scope here. Remember when PTB first had cars and nobody could find car parts? That's because these junk piles are supposed to have car parts on all of them, or at least some. And technically they were in the game, they were just shut off because, again, this was in the game well before New Gen came out, but they were still prototyping it, making sure everything ran correctly because it was so hard to run it on old systems. But essentially, let me see if we can find one here, like for sure. We saw one up here a second ago. Is this the one in there? So essentially what they did was they shut off all the different basket spawns. Well, they shut them off, but they were there, but they just turned them invisible. And so people had a hard time finding these. Remember that? Well, that's because they turned them all off and kind of forgot about it. The only places you can find these parts were essentially at the gas station and the mining outpost because they didn't shut those off necessarily. So all these junk piles essentially did have the car parts. They had to just turn it back on. And that same type of thing is happening here with the terminals. Again, they're in the game kind of. They probably don't work. Does that mean there's a bunch of train systems under the map? No. It just means that it's not complete, it's broken, so they turn things off. That's very common. So we've already seen an indicator of this already. I did a video on this already, so I'll go ahead and link that now in the upper right-hand corner. But it's important. So initially we're like, hey, they're definitely doing trains to some degree. So on to this here. So the next big change that came with trains was this connection, once the surface tracks came in, the connection to the train yard. And I'll show you here if this, hopefully this still makes sense. I promise. So these different train tracks do eventually connect to the train monument. And that's because there's an active part in this that's now a puzzle that gives you a payout. And to go back to the discussion of turning things on and off, we currently have this in the game. They just have things shut off. As a matter of fact, let me get over here so I don't get shot at by the NPCs. This is the train yard as it should exist for us on Rust Console Edition, but you'll notice one major change. It's about the center of the screen. Let me go ahead and detach. We essentially have everything but this building and this walkway. They're technically in the game, but they're turned off and the collision's turned off. So essentially you can walk through them, but they do exist. And that's because this is solely based off of the trains being connected to the tracks and having the train being functional and then doing a puzzle here and then actively decoding or unwrapping the loot that comes inside of the different carts that spawn across the world. And again, it's turned off. It exists, but it's turned off because it's not functional. And I mean, you can't really do this without the train, now can you? So, and we did talk about that in a video prior to this, but that's pertinent. But as I was walking around down here, on our current version of Rust Console Edition, I noticed the work cart. And that's not something super new. But I did notice this as we came across the side. I noticed that it was rigged up. It had remnants of the entity and not just the prefab. And you would almost miss it. I have a screenshot back at the base here. We'll show you here in a second. And like, I totally missed it like so many times. It was currently in our testing branch version right now. But if we go back here, and I was like, wait a second, that shouldn't be glowing at all. And it only glows when it's connected and it's an actual work cart. So I promise I'll show you here in a second. This is so minor. I know this, but I totally missed it probably for the longest time. But essentially you would only see these if it was rigged to be a work cart. So if you get inside of here, you can kind of see, things came in slow. But if I pop in here and I turn on the light, like things are obviously a lot brighter. But you can see because this is an active entity you can interact with and not just a hollow prefab. You can see that different things work. You can see that I have the driver section here that's actually spawned in, and you can see that these are functional. But you'll notice that back there in that prefab, those lights were kind of glowing, which is weird, right? Well, that only happens when the work cart exists as a work cart. So here's the actual screenshot from Rust Console Edition on the PTB as of recording this. So this is the early October. And in the daytime, you would totally miss it. You would not even catch it. But I was like, not only is that the prefab, but that's the prefab with some of the entities, some of the functionality in it. And then so I waited for nighttime, and I noticed it's glowing. For sure it's glowing. So I'm like, dude, they're definitely doing something with this, right? Like, this is such a core unit. So even if they bring this in the first stage, or even like a combined hybrid version, you're going to see this thing be functional to some degree. So actually up here in the cab, it's actually that driver section's hollowed out. So actually, let me show you this. This might be helpful. So when you spawn in a work cart, you can see the different versions. I don't know how well you can see this on the screen, but you can see it's actually different parts. There's the entity itself, but then there's like the different variants, but then you have the work cart item storage, and then the driver section, and then the fuel storage. Those are different pieces that go on top of the entity or the prefab to make it the working entity. So this would be the driver section here, right? This would be the storage, and then this would be the fuel/engine compartment. So you can actually spawn these different entities in on top of this, or I should say, well, yeah, I guess these are entities inside of entities, box inside of a box. So you can see how all of these work together to become this active work cart. Actually, let me show you. You can move around, you can go forward, you bump into stuff. And so essentially we have this at the train yard right now without this, without these functional pieces, but this has been left behind because it's glowing outside, and that shouldn't be a thing right now, right? Because if it's just a prefab, it shouldn't have any of that working. So I was like, huh, isn't that interesting? So I thought in combination with this, knowing full well that there's at least a subway being worked on or messed with because the cut for the terminal exists outside of the outpost on the donut map. I believe it still is there. We do know they are working on trains. Now, I don't think they were really working on this too much before they knew there was a new gen. I don't know how feasible that was, but to be fair, if it is underground, everything kind of stops rendering. I know we're under the normal here and you wouldn't normally see this, but things above ground don't really get rendered in once you're inside of one of these tunnels. So performance isn't a huge thing. And honestly, since we're all on the new gen stuff now, it's not really a major issue because, you know, our systems can handle it. But like beforehand, it could have been possible just because when you're down here, things above us don't render unless we go outside of this, this texture normal. But again, we don't really have to worry about that. So the biggest thing I think is in the way of this, so I don't think this is happening like, you know, next month or anything, but here's the deal. This really has to exist when maps are 4K plus. As a matter of fact, I don't think these ever existed in PC Rust on a map smaller than 4.25K. That's the standard size. Let me go ahead and show you this here. There we go, we'll turn on the interface. This map here that we test on, this is a standard size map, 4.2K squared kilometers. And that's because you can start to see how intricate it is between these train tracks, the roads, the different points of interest, the monuments. And so you need these different points of interest, but you also need areas in between for people to build. That's kind of the formula. You have spaces where people build, and you have the points of interest that pull people out, and that gives you the interaction. So essentially, this won't happen unless the map is at least 4K or 4.25K. And we do know that we are going to get larger maps, and in turn, because these are linked together, a larger population. So until we see larger populations, I don't think we'll see this. I guess it is possible, but I don't think it's very likely. So essentially, we're looking at a 2026 release. We'll probably see larger maps somewhere in 2026, and then we'll see something like this kind of chase behind it, maybe right after, or maybe, you know, an update or two before they actually hit it. And I think we'll start to see more of the terrain changes here too, because you'll start to see how the rivers kind of get wider as they get closer to the ocean. Clearly, we have a jungle biome here. That's its own update, but you can really start to see just how deep all of this gets. And also caves. I mean, shoot, we don't even have caves yet, right, guys? Lots of people want caves, you know? So a lot of things kind of have to come first. I guess the caves don't have to, but the larger map, the larger population has to be a thing. There has to be stability there. But we are seeing definite activity and movement towards them actively prototyping, using this, and then shutting different things off inside of the game. So trains are on the horizon. I think we'll see them sometime in 26 for sure, because remember, we now have 12 different moments or times to actually get something big like this. And let's not forget, I mean, PC Rust is always updating. I mean, shoot, we have new BPs. shoot, they now have modular boats that aren't even out yet on PC. They will be at the end of October. So it's like, you know, we need to make room for all of these things here. So trains are a big part of the game. And I just was really excited that I noticed that. I was like, dude, that's like a rigged entity that's like shut off. You know, once I saw these glowing lights, so I was very excited for this, and also knowing that they turned off the different sections of the train yard, too. I was like, well, they definitely have it set up to take it once the trains are in. So, yeah, very exciting to see all this stuff. Trains are super fun in this game. Oh my goodness, it's great for solos. It's great for when you just come into a server late because you can just kind of grab a little bit of low grade and just start taking off. So we'll kind of have to wait and see, but I don't think I've seen anything for locomotives yet or even the caboose, but who knows? We're definitely seeing the core work card stuff. So subways at least, most likely in 2026, but look for the larger maps first. So yeah, that's the secret update. They're cooking over there. I'm very excited for it. So hopefully we'll see you in the next live stream / video. You should already see a video on the terminal talk we had earlier this year. So if you're interested, go ahead and check that out, and we'll see you in the next one. Love you. Bye.